Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton. We're in our open and welcoming community. We live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. We extend a special welcome to our visitors this morning. This is a non-standard barn racing kind of service, but hopefully you can follow along. We're glad you're here, and we invite you to stop by our welcome table out in Robinson Lounge after worship so that we can answer your questions and get to know you a little bit. Just one brief announcement. I know that in Foz Theater after the service, there's going to be folks who went to the UUA General Assembly a few weeks ago. We're going to talk about their experiences and can answer questions. So I think that will be around 11:45, 12 p.m. after the service in Foz. Again, welcome. We're so very happy you've joined us. And now for our chalice lighting.
From Walter Benjamin about the angel of history. A storm blows out from paradise, which has captured him in his wings and is so strong the angel can no longer close them. This storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. That which we call progress is this storm.
And now if you'll join in our unison affirmation, printed in your order of service. It's from Terry Pratchett's 1996 novel, Hogfather. Humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. Our prayer and meditation this morning was written by Tamara Lebec. Holy One, we gather this day to be reminded of the sacred in the ordinary, the holy moments of waking yet again to a new day, the feel of the earth beneath our feet, the crisp cool on our skin, the joy of being welcomed by our fellow travelers, the warmth of this place. Help us this day to be fully present in our living, awake to each breath. Remind us, O Holy One, that life is taking place in the in-between, as well as our lofty goals. Remind us, O Holy One, that the detours and the details craft the path and make it our own. Help us to remember that we did not make this day, but that we have the glorious pleasure to greet each moment as it unfolds, to reach out and kiss its cheek, as though it were a visitor who has come a long way just to see us. These and the prayers of our hearts we now lift up in the silence. Blessed be, and amen.
30 years ago, when I was a youth advisor here, a parent told me she was so grateful to our youth group because she'd been terrified her kid would convert to fundamentalism and annoy the hell out of her. I didn't tell her I'd done that very thing to my poor mother when I was 15. During my year-and-a-half phase as a Pentecostal, born-again Christian, I did annoy the hell out of my mother, who'd cleared her system of the rural Kansas fundamentalism with which she'd been raised with years-long Jungian psychoanalytic training on the Upper East Side. We lived in a Mennonite community in the sticks of Upper Bucks County, and my mother was the only person I knew who spent part of every weekend in Manhattan. Before my Christian phase, I'd placed my mother and her coterie of Gotham sophisticates on a pedestal built of cultural treasures that seemed out of reach for me in Percy, Pennsylvania. But despite my worldly ambitions, I wasn't sheepish in the least about my new faith. On the contrary, I rather enjoyed making my mother cringe. Even the drama of speaking in tongues didn't embarrass me, tears sometimes cascading down my cheeks. Somebody here has spoken in tongues, apparently. I loved raising my arms during services with people with whom I had nothing in common except our shared faith, which was more than enough to justify my visceral love of them. But some things my fellow congregants believed went a step too far and did mortify even me. Hell, for instance. Angels, especially. Billy Graham had just published a book entitled Angels, God's Secret Agents. Cringe. So imagine my surprise 10 years after my born-again phase when my partner, now husband, Michael, a Princeton humanities professor, announced he was developing an undergraduate class on angels. During the next few months, we accumulated little statuary, bric-a-brac, posters with images of angels. To this day, our house is awash in angels. On our first date, we saw the performance artist Laurie Anderson's Strange Angels at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. A few years later, Angels in America opened to acclaim as the most significant American play of the late 20th century. When I asked Michael, up there in his beautiful ivory tower, why he wanted to make a class on angels, he referenced Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, Paul Klee's Angelus Novus, painting after painting from the Renaissance, Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire, James Merrill, etc., etc. Michael shared the Walter Benjamin quote about the angel of history, which stares with horror as it is blown backward into the future, seeing only the detritus of history piling up and not the progress. He explained that the Greek word angelos, translated into English versions of the New Testament as angel, literally means messenger. And angels appear when the world is desperate for a message. Michael and I got involved in 1989, when everyone in academia seemed to be talking about the fin de siècle, the end of the century, and the fin de millénaire, the end of the millennium. AIDS was raging, along with fears about Y2K. Some of you will have to ask your grandparents what Y2K was. I heard a lot back then about the apocalyptic imagery of the last 20 years of every century since the Middle Ages, which have typically featured a great plague, cultural disruption, and angels. In the early 1990s, angels were everywhere, from avant-garde art to pop cultural quiche. Remember the music videos? Someone wrote that the new phenomenon of the internet was like angels on steroids. We were bombarded with messages through the air from we knew not where. I suppose the early 1990s helped move me past cringing at imagery of faith that seemed counter to reality and rationality. A lot of what I believe in now occupies a non-rational space. Kindness, generosity, empathy, among other expressions of the miraculous. I see a particularly over-the-top angel sometimes when I look at Michael. I see a company of angels here when I'm sufficiently sleep-deprived. I can still empathize with that parent of 30 years ago, terrorized by dark fantasies of her teen going fundamentalist, and with my poor mother 45 years ago. But I've learned not to cringe at honest experience of the sacred, even when it invokes great winged messengers.
Our two readings this morning come to us via the internet, but from Reverend Peter J. Gomes and the poet Joel Leon. First, it's from Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verse 11. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." And I Saw by Joel Leone. I never saw my mother walk on water, but I saw her wait for the bus in the snow to pay the rent. We define holy differently. So, good morning. It was not a very reverent afternoon, as I remember it. I wouldn't have predicted at the time for it to be a formative spiritual moment, in all caps. But those are rarely predictable, to be honest. Any angelic inspiration would have likewise been entirely unexpected. It was probably a Saturday, maybe a Sunday in late 1999, probably cloudy, maybe cold, given that it was either a few weeks before or a few weeks after Thanksgiving. My memory by now is cloudy as well, so you forgive me the poetic license. But it was a group of us, my good teenage friends, hanging around the movie theater. That in itself wasn't unusual. We were very much movie rats rather than mall rats, dropped off by parents at the multiplex on most Friday nights to be retrieved a few hours later. Although there was one legendary mall rat evening where we got ejected from a toy shop for reasons that to this day are not quite clear to me, in the very same mall that we eventually saw this movie in. What was unusual was that the movie, called Dogma, was R-rated. So if we wanted in, one of our poor parents had to stick around and chaperone us. The role fell this time to Chris, father of Katie. Katie had been one of my best friends since the 2 of us met in 3rd grade at the age of 9. And though I didn't know it at the time, Chris was also a Unitarian Universalist and member here at UUCP, and I think is in the back right now. Hi, Chris. The director and writer of Dogma, Kevin Smith, had by this time made Clerks, Chasing Amy, and of course Mallrats. Those films may have provoked ire in their own way, but of this I was entirely unaware. I was coming along because that's what you did when you were 14 and got invited to something to do on the weekend. So the only thing I knew going in was that the movie was likely to be funny, and that even though Kevin Smith himself was a Catholic, other Catholics were very, very angry at him. While you could charitably call teenage Emma well-educated, and less charitably a pain-in-the-ass smart aleck, I had very few opinions about holiness or spirituality in general. I was raised Quaker, but by the turn of the millennium, that raising had tilted mostly towards the ethical and the moral rather than the spiritual. Anything supernatural, there in the quiet of the Princeton Meeting House, has had and has mostly stuck with me in my mother's favorite phrase, the light of God in everyone, often shortened to just the light, as in I'll hold you in the light, which I still say today. But what is the light of, if anything? Still to be determined. So I had very cursory knowledge at this point of any theoretical heavenly hierarchy. Most of what I did know probably came from Christmas carols. I had Catholic friends who went to CCD every day after school, but I knew as much about what they did there as I did of what the Jewish friends did in Hebrew school around the same time. I probably knew even less given that I got invited to a few bat mitzvahs, but no first communions. I have educated myself a lot more extensively in the intervening 25 years. However, even Kevin Smith might laugh at his raunchy road movie being a teenager's introduction to abstruse debates within Catholicism. Hopefully someday I'll get a chance to tell him, because despite the poop jokes, despite Salma Hayek playing a stripper who is actually a descended muse, and my first meeting with the Wanderers, Jay and Silent Bob, what stuck with me about Dogma to this day was the angels. Not to spoil the plot too much, But the film hinges on two very different versions of God, at least the God who all the lesser beings, both mortal and supernatural, understand that deity to be. The ancient, fiery Old Testament God who banishes Ben Affleck's Bartleby and Matt Damon's Loki, also known as the Angel of Death, banishes them to Wisconsin for the entire span of human history, and creates the plot's motor in the simple attempt to get home. But that God is also ostensibly the same God who dispatches Alan Rickman's angel Metatron and kickstarts the attempt of a motley band to save the world from destruction due to basically logic. Yeah, you'll have to watch the movie. And that same God also is briefly played by Canadian pop legend Alanis Morissette wearing a tutu, which angered a whole different group of people. Needless to say, I loved the movie. I loved the movie so much that I spent some of my hard-earned allowance money to buy a VCR tape, and then about 10 years later, got it on DVD, which, for a tangent, came in weirdly usefully because Harvey Weinstein, of all people, banished Dogma from streaming for 2 decades until last year. You can actually see it on streaming now. With Dogma, I'd spend hours and hours and hours along with the movie, particularly trying to memorize a certain monologue, Cry of Pain, that Ben Affleck performs in a random parking garage. So, when Kevin Smith says to this day that his movie, even with the curse words, is an honest exploration of faith, I believe him. Some people call Dogma irreverent. I see something else. In the way that even the angels of Dogma struggle, in the way they try to determine the grace and intention of a higher power, or of their angelic or human purpose overall, I see in that a reverence all its own. I think I love Dogma exactly because the angels struggle. 2 of them fail. Alan Rickman's Metatron survives till the end of the movie, but then 9 years ago, we lost Alan, and he's up with the angels now, if you believe that. I don't necessarily see irreverence in cursing or Metatron trying to drink alcohol, or even the spurt of Old Testament bloody, cartoonish violence that is at the movie's climax. I see all of that instead as necessary prologue, earning the sheer intimate reverence in my favorite moment, where Bartleby realizes his flaws and his trauma and gets hugged by Alanis Morissette's God in her arms and tells her, "I'm sorry." That "I'm sorry" is the end of Bartleby's story, but for most of us, and in my opinion, an "I'm sorry" is usually, "I'm sorry, I'll try to do better." As I alluded to before, most of my adult spiritual life has centered around the tangible, the importance of works to faith, or the connection of faith to some kind of an ethical life. This includes my long period of being what the news apparently now calls a nun, no religious organization of any kind. Started entirely coincidentally around the same time I saw Dogma. It's unrelated. From age 14 until I walked into UCP in late 2021, age 36, I didn't attend any religious community with any regularity. I did, however, study religious history with a weird fascination, continuing to find hooks that kept me coming back and coming back. I attribute this, I think, to my tendency to find meaning in the act, meaning in interaction. And I found that in history, sometimes transcendently, sometimes mutated by so much of Catholic or Christian or other organized dogma. I learned also about the Jewish concept of a mitzvah, a good deed, even if it took me until later to learn that 613 mitzvot are particularly enumerated in Christian scripture. I have studied the history of Islam, perhaps less systematically than I could have, but one of their 5 pillars that has always stuck with me is that of zakat, the mandate of charity and community work according to one's means. To all this, I could relate. To all this, I could be reverent. As Joel Leone says, I revere the single mother waiting with her soggy feet to board the bus to feed her children. She I have been able all along to find holy because she connects to the moments of transcendence I can find in my own daily life. But angels, always a little bit more difficult. Don't get me wrong, I'm simultaneously a fan of fantasy novels, a second or third generation fan even. I can find meaning in a constructed system of supernatural power, of beings more powerful than we could ever dream or imagine being. However, a being that never struggles, a being anything short of the deific omnipotence attributed to that light in all beings, that's where I hit my limit, at least for now. This might also be attributed to two of the most formidable spiritual influences in my own life, apart from family. One, Dermot McCullough, is a gay academic specializing in Christian history, and the other, Terry Pratchett, now beyond the veil, wherever you believe that to be, was a former journalist who spent 40 or 50 years puncturing the pretenses of those aforementioned fantasy novels. Yet, somehow, along with the rest, the two of them have created in me, and I think a bunch of other people, a well-rounded person. What may be most obvious, first off, about Dermot McCullough is his lengthy credentials. But what attracts me most, and what attracted me in my 20s and now to his books, is the critical but empathetic approach that he takes to his history. He doesn't set himself a low bar. He goes with all 3 millennia of history of religion. On the subject of angels in particular, McCullough points out in his new book that the valorization of angels, well apart from their scant appearance in the Judeo-Christian scriptures, is really part of a much larger struggle from the 3rd and 4th and 5th centuries CE on much larger themes. There's a relatively manageable number of scriptural mentions of angels, or beings that, as Drake alluded to, became known as angels. But something that is much harder and a much wider project is getting to know the ancient monks and nuns and preachers and apostates and regular people who wielded the cudgel of angels against their fellows. Like the truism about sex, angels are never just about angels, they're about us. In cultures that revere an omnipotence, revere an all-knowing and all-planning God, angels are a way to wrestle with questions of power and purity and sin and responsibility. I feel like, thus, it is really no accident that one of the most enduring images is of a fallen angel who doesn't get there. The most enduring image of the Christian devil is Lucifer, formerly the light bringer. Reverend Bill has been running a UU Bible study since this past January, but we haven't really yet gotten to the prophet Isaiah, who is apparently the source that John Milton used about a millennia later for his epic poem, Paradise Lost. Milton, Lucifer, and the appearance of the Nephilim in Genesis have a whole lot to answer for, good and bad. They became a cottage industry at various points through the past 2 millennia. No hierarchy of devils without a hierarchy of angels. No Malleus Maleficarum, no witch hunts. The cudgel of angels strikes again and again and again, 1,000 years later, second verse, same as the first. But maybe that's too simple a judgment to just leave it there. Angels are never just about angels. Angels, and especially the fallen angels, are a trope that have influenced Christian writers of varying levels of belief. What keeps them coming back? What makes that trope so appealing? J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were famous friends of the mid-20th century, also famous for their beings of light. The angelic power with no dark lord or witch to battle is, to be honest, kind of dull. Morgoth and Sauron in Lord of the Rings, for one, are not fallen angels per se, but really they're close enough to look like them once you get the serial number scratched off. For those of you who maybe only know C.S. Lewis through the world of Narnia, though, Aslan, the White Witch, and all that, I have to make another recommendation, via my mother, actually. All credit to her. The Screwtape Letters, an epistolary novel, set of letters, approaches many of Lewis's same themes of ethics and morality in daily life, but from a much more mundane, earthbound, and funnier perspective at times. For instance, I personally remember this work from a set of cassette tapes narrated by John Cleese, if you want to connect it to all of the other humor about religion. In the Screwtape Letters, a set of letters is sent from a senior demon to his hapless nephew and junior tempter, Screwtape, at length about the best way to corrupt a human soul. I haven't read the novel in so long, I'm going to have to go do that afterwards. But I remember how hilarious and biting the commentary on human behavior was, exactly because it was from a distance. It was from the perspective of the demons and the angels, the bureaucracy competing on both sides. The detached professionalism of a supernatural being, referring at all times to the other side, working day to day to battle for us, for human souls. All of this irreverence, all of this humor, written by one of the most famous Christian believers of the 20th century, C.S. Lewis. He wrote one of the most famous Jesus allegories, Jesus as Aslan the lion, for children. What does it tell us that a famous writer like that could also be so irreverent in his use of angels, using angels and demons to basically skewer the bureaucracy of mid-century Britain? Angels, never just angels. Angels are the start of the discussion rather than the end. In writing this sermon, I looked around for authority and didn't always find it. But I looked around and I was trying to see if Reverend Peter J. Gomes had anything to say. While I was a nun, he was also the chaplain of the Tercentennial Church at Harvard, a very distinguished Protestant position. He died too young, but he always seems to have had something to say on this subject. I was looking around for inspiration. Oh, there he is on my shelf. And what I found, though, was not about angels per se. Again, the verses from Acts that I read at the beginning never quite use that word. What you might take to be angels are instead, in that translation, men wreathed in white. Men wreathed in white, chiding and the confused and hurting apostles not to look into the sky. Do not stare at the sky. He will come back to you the same way you saw him go. In the intervening years, artists have nevertheless interpreted some pretty spectacular versions of that transfiguration. I don't think it was exactly the same way that they saw him go. But those images of angels, of an angelic Jesus, are holy in their own way. Why wouldn't we look to the skies? But then, the same way you saw him go. I could also stop here and do an entire other tangential sermon on the way Terry Pratchett takes this theme and runs with it, finding the light in all things, stopping the apocalypse, via a group of small children, 2 hapless young adults, and an angel and a demon. But the angels and the demons are not centered in hell or an angelic palace in the sky, but instead in a cramped London bookshop in the corners of Soho, the same way you saw him go. You can look to the sky, you can be guided to Bethlehem by a star, you can revere the heavenly hierarchy, if that helps. Be inspired by stories of visitation by angels fallen, cursing, guardian, or sauntering vaguely downward, as Pratchett put it. But don't forget to look around once in a while. Find a few opportunities to be reverent while you're in the checkout line at the grocery. Look for inspiration on a Saturday afternoon at the mall with your friends. You might not see any wings or a flaming sword or halos, but you just might find some grace. May it be so, and amen. And at the end of our hour, we extinguish our chalice, knowing that its light carries us until we gather again. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of greater love, beauty, and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with neighbor and stranger by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.